Good seeing you. You guys do your thing. I know. Oh, you're good.
Randall,
Yes.
when we do get started, I'm going to have one person I know from the audience that needs to make a statement for us that we had already pre-approved from the board, so I don't see anybody else that's going to be here. It'll be Ms. Bambi Dillon, just so you're aware. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, good. All right, good, good.
Where's he at? Oh, God.
So in my 30 seconds, I don't know what looks like you guys are going to get started, Mark.
That it is, right? That's what it is.
That's cool. It always goes back to this when they're done.
I'm sorry, Randall, did you say something to me?
Yeah, I said we're about to get started on this here, it's only 12 o'clock, so I don't know what it looks like on your end to get it going.
I've got Superman running through the door right now, meaning Tim Williams, and other than that, all my guys will be here. If I can have 30 seconds, and I think Diane's coming to the door as well, what are yours?
No, you're good, you're good.
Look at him with his green screen.
So Kyle, if we can pull off this,
Like change it, that's good.
if we can pull off this meeting where we have some people on Zoom, some people in person, this, that, and the other, we should be able to get to Mars, by next week.
Yeah, this one always shows it.
All right, I'm free.
I think we are all present and accounted for. So Randall, you'll start with your preliminaries first, and then I'll go behind you guys.
Sounds good, I appreciate it. And can we get a call to order, please? And, Mr. O'Leary, can we get the roll call?
Sure. Mr. Hoffman?
Present.
Mrs. O'Brien? Here. Dr. Sampson?
Here.
I don't think Dr. Solis has joined yet. And Mrs. Zander?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Ballard,
right.
you, want to go to your,
Yep, we will call this meeting to order. Roll call, please. Mr. Ballard. Here. Go ahead, Tia. Here.
Mrs. Lorain,
Here.
Ms. Johnson? Here. And Mr. Williams?
Here.
Can we stand for the pledge, please?
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so I'm gonna take it back here, Mr. Ballard, just real quick, so we can get approval of the agenda. Approval of the agenda and the motion.
So moved.
Second.
Excellent. And,
Roll call. Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien? Yes. Dr. Sampson?
yes.
Welcome, Dr. Solis.
I'm present.
And Mrs. Zander?
Present. Yes.
All right, so that concludes our approval of the agenda. Ms. Ballard?
Okay, so everyone between the Zoom and who's here, we've got a slight latency, so as you speak and you need someone to respond, give them a slight delay, so that catches up. And then, for everyone who is here, we're gonna need you to talk directly into the microphone so we can make sure that we're hearing each other properly. First recognition of the visitors, I do think we have one specific with Ms. Bambi Dillon. Would you please come to the podium?
Everyone out there is there stuff.
Yeah, and everyone that's on the Zoom, if you can mute when you're not speaking, we can get rid of that delay that we're hearing over here as well. We're getting a delay from someone.
Hi, I'm Bambi Dillon. I wanted to speak on two subjects. The first one is the partnership that we have with Second Harvest Food Bank of Northeast Ohio. Lorain City Schools has a great relationship with them. We're able to feed anywhere from 400 to 500 of our school families every second Thursday and fourth Thursday of the month. We've had the National Guard helping us, and I'm not sure if it got approved. We're hoping that they'll be here through December to help us. One thing though that makes me very proud to be associated with the whole program is our employees. The dedication that they have shown through 2 years, but especially through this pandemic, makes you very proud. I'm very proud to say that I'm a part of Lorain City Schools, and all of you should be very proud of our employees. Because you talk about frontline workers at the hospitals and that, but here they are right on the front line with the people putting the food into their cars. And there's many of them that take food and go to families that aren't able to come to the food pantry. And I know for a fact, one of the women from the school system, she goes to 55 homes. And she will go into other pantries and wait in line for an hour and a half to get the food to take to our families. I just think the world of her to do something like that for our families in Lorain. So that's somebody that we need to be very proud of. So on Thursday, August 6th, we're having the food pantry at Longfellow. So we're gonna honor the National Guard and the employees that have helped through the pandemic with the food pantry. So I'm inviting the school board to be there and Dr. Graham, because we'd like you to be there to present the certificates to the individuals and show them how much they're appreciated for everything they do outside the realm of their job. And then the second item is the school levy. I'm ready to go. We're gonna go, we're gonna win. So we'll start, probably I'm having a meeting with a few people next week. And then after that, after we get it organized, then we're gonna invite more people. And we'll probably do Zoom meetings or whatever, or do social distancing. So, and we're gonna need the help because it's quite a large renewal. All right, thank you.
And I'd like to say to you, Bambi, we're very proud to be associated with you as well, and you do a great job with this community and for our kids. So thank you for all you do. We're going to move down to the approval of the minutes from June 8th and June 13th. I need a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion to approve, minutes as stated.
Motion by Tim Williams, seconded by Mr. Don Johnson. Roll call.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Ms. Nazario?
Yes.
And Mr. Drew?
Yes. Do you have anything else on your agenda before we get into presentations and before I finish mine, Mr. Simpson?
works there.
Okay.
Go ahead, say it again.
I said, do you want me to just finish running through my agenda before we get to presentation, or do you have anything to do on your agenda before I finish mine?
Nope, nope, you're good. So let's go through that and then we'll go through the updates, when you're done.
Outstanding. Okay, do we have, any old business? With no old business, report and recommendation of our treasurer.
Nothing at this time.
Outstanding. Next up is the reports and recommendations of the CEO, which will take us into our presentation part. So,
Mr. Fowler, Dr. Sampson, and first of all, I want to thank everyone for making themselves available tonight. I know that communication is critical, especially through strange times, strange, scary times. And definitely fit that description. A couple of weeks ago, we had a board meeting, and the purpose of that board meeting was to give an update as to where we were. And what we shared at that meeting was we had a conceptual deadline of the end of the month that you share a rough draft version of our plan. And that's what our goal is tonight. There are still a few more steps before we lock things in. For example, some things need to be vetted. There's still also some information that we're waiting for that we need before we make some final decisions. But I do get a great idea of exactly where we are. And I think as important as where we are is how we got there. And I want to make sure that I applaud our team. And we have obviously the Board of Education, we have commission members, we have our many members of our leadership team present tonight to help folks get updated on exactly where we are. So again, I think as you see, as we roll out the process that we followed, you'll see that we've been very thorough. But I think you'll also appreciate the fact that we have some questions that are unanswered. And one example, this is more a plea than a criticism, so I hope it's accepted that way. During our staff survey, it was reported by our staff members that about 50% of them met the criteria set by the CDC as being at high risk for extreme symptoms if they were testing positive for COVID. So the next step in that process is to let HR know so we can begin the paperwork to provide proper accommodations and consistent with our policies. To this date, we've had 8 people respond. So in order for us to plan, we have to have an idea of what our staff needs are so we can make sure that we're serving our folks as well. As we roll our plan, I think that there's one thing, a qualifier that I want to put out there. If it appears in any way, shape, or form that we're being critical of any of my predecessors or any of the leadership teams that were here in the past or any decisions that were made, it's only because we're not communicating very clearly. And I hope that if it ever sounds that way, you call us out on that so we can clarify. Our focus is on sharing where we believe we are today, defining and describing where we need to be, and setting a plan to get us where we are to where we need to be. And again, anything other than that is unintentional, so please let us know and continue to ask questions. But before I'm going to introduce a couple of people, Michael Scott, our assistant superintendent, Ross May, and we make fun of his title because it's a very, very long one, but it describes what he does. But they're going to walk us through a process. Michael's going to get us caught up. Michael's going to recap how we got to this point, and Ross is going to walk us through the data and processes that led to the recommendation that we're going to share to have vetted by our staff and our community. But one thing that this is not typical, but it's going to be typical of how we behave. And I think it's important as a leadership team, that includes everybody at the table and then the folks zooming in, to be a part of it. What I mean by that is there are many slides coming up. We're going to ask for feedback. I hope we get to a point, and hopefully that becomes more obvious tonight, where we're going to start filling the blanks for each other and clarify comments that we make to make sure that we're speaking as clearly as we can, but also to demonstrate that each slide doesn't represent the work of one group. We're not siloed here. We all take ownership of all the slides. We all take ownership of all the work that needs to happen, and we can all go through the slide and present ourselves. But again, it's a very much a team approach. I think it needs to be obvious to the community we serve that the approach we're taking. So without further ado, I'm going to hand off to Michael. If you could walk us through the process on exactly how we got to where we are.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. So we are going to review how we got here. So for the last 3 to 4 weeks, there's been a lot of work that has get us here. So we need to recap that so everyone's on the same page. First thing, the biggest communication problem, the biggest communication problem, do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. And with that being said, we've been real intentional on trying to understand the needs. Questions beget more questions. Surveys led to things that we just need to unpack. To be honest, it may have been easy to say, this is what we're going to do. It's hard to make sure that we get insight and input from others. So I want to just give this quote to frame how we went about getting to where we are today. So just to show and to review, we do have a 15-phase process that's going to lead us to an opening. And we formed our leadership team, we've had some initial questions, and we're gonna go through each step, just kind of give you a quick review. So 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a team that came together, and we began to just talk about what went well in the spring, what didn't go well, and how we're gonna be real crystal clear about knowing that information. So this initial group began to then discuss 4 questions. How are staff and families doing during this unprecedented time? So we're really getting to know how people are doing, not only in March, but at that point in June. How did remote learning go during the spring? So what worked? What didn't work? What are the concerns about possible return to school in the fall? So really getting ahead of it, trying to get ahead and say, what are your concerns? What are your biggest concerns? And then what is the best way to stay connected with our staff and families? So we know that communication is huge. And as we'll go through different slides, you'll see who we've been able to reach. Unfortunately, at the same time, you see a percentage of folks that we weren't able to reach. So we have to do better. We have to, and when we say we, we're talking about the community as a whole. This is going to be, it has to be a partnership here, and we have to do better on our end. And then at the same time, we're going to ask people to reach out to us in different ways as well. So from that point, we then created staff and family surveys. We started with the staff, and we had 967 responses. And that response rate was near 100%. So we got an idea of how staff was feeling. Then we moved into the family survey, and we asked our staff to step up and make personalized phone calls. But we also knew that that wouldn't be the only way that we could and should reach our families. So we connected through online surveys, and we reached roughly 52% of our families. We also made sure that we were able to communicate in both English and Spanish, so we had Spanish versions of our surveys, and we also leveraged our staff to make calls to Spanish-speaking families in Spanish. So the next stage, we're gathering information, and at right about that time is when the Ohio Department of Education began to release the Reset and Restart Guide. And from that, we found out that there were a lot to that, and a lot of questions that we were prepared to answer, and some that we were going to need to dive into deeply. And this is just an example of what those categories were. So while that was going on, we began to analyze the staff survey. And there were some big takeaways. Our teachers did want to be back in school, but safety was paramount. We needed assurance that we have proper technology and the professional learning that goes along with that to do the task well, not thrown into another situation where we have to respond. There were questions around discipline. Knowing that safety would be a question, what if students didn't comply to those safety measures? What do we do then? How do we maintain 6 feet of social distancing? And then there were some real concerns about wearing masks, and that's nothing different than what's going on in the world right now. What we did learn from this was that 51% of our staff indicated, and as Dr. Graham alluded to, that they or someone they care for met the CDC guidelines for increased risk of severe complications from COVID. So, what have we been doing since? Right? That's the big question. And everyone's tuning in to find out what have you been doing since and what's the plan. We understand that. But I want to reiterate the fact that there is a process that we have to stay true to, not only for now in the sake of COVID planning and emergency, but how we operate as an organization moving forward. Organizational health is paramount to how we're going to be successful. Listening to staff and the community is going to be paramount to how we do business moving forward. and you can't rush the process. So what we have done since then is we formed work groups. And those work groups were broken up into what we consider to be areas based upon the ODE Restart Guide, key areas. So we have a work group around communication. We have action managers for each group, and we have an implementation team. And that implementation team represents stakeholders throughout our organization. We have communications, extracurriculars, human resources, curriculum and instruction, operations, student and family engagement, student services, and technology. And all of those groups then began to break apart that ODE guide and look at the questions. And we broke those apart and we assigned those questions to different work groups. We also understood there was a great deal of overlap. So our collaboration was going to be essential. So what does the work look like? Well, there's a hybrid of us getting together face to face. There were some remote experiences. Some of us were working in the cars as we moved from spot to spot in our world. Some of us were in clubhouses because we had to navigate family and work at the same time. But most importantly, the work was together. Every step of the way, various voices. There was not, one person or one agenda. And then some of the products that have come from that. I want to begin by talking about the norms of collaboration, going back to the idea that we are not only building an infrastructure to be prepared for COVID and what we have to go through, but we're also building the infrastructure for how we're going to exist as an organization down the road. So we begin with the norms of collaboration. And we ask our groups to identify how we create safe spaces in every meeting so every voice can be heard. And then there were products that were created. So you'll see things that look like the project management template, where we identify tasks and who's responsible for those tasks and when the expectation would be accomplished, so that we can see along the way that we are moving forward, that we're not stagnant in the creation of the plan and then the vetting of the plan and then the implementation of said plan. You see there's also data points that were used there and surveys. So that's what the work looks like. It's just a little snapshot. Very important though to know that there's been a lot of hands along this, a lot of process to get us to where we are, and we're continuing to stay true to what we said we would do. So, since we last met, continuously, we did analyze those family surveys. At this time, I do get to turn it over to Mr. Ross May here to take us through our data and what we've learned through the family survey.
All right, thanks, Michael. Before we get started, I want to just say good evening, and to everybody that's welcomed me to the district, thanks. I so appreciate it. It's scary switching jobs, and I so appreciate everybody who's been so kind and so generous and caring to reach out and welcome me and say thanks for coming. Do you need anything? So thanks, really appreciate it. All right, so let's get into we're looking at step 7 of our process, and so we'll get into the family survey results, and we're going to show you some of the results that we captured from our families, and then we're going to invite many of the team leaders to comment as we go, and just some of their insights. So we'll kind of have a back and forth here a little bit around some of the data. So the first thing is what you see up there, the total responses, and these are the actual people that weighed in. We had a little over 3,000 total responses, which ended up representing just a touch over 52% of the district. So in a very short amount of time, to be able to get in touch with a little over half the district was pretty exciting. It also lets us know we've got a lot of work to do because there are 48% of our folks that we did not directly hear from. And when we looked at just how well representative of the district and across the schools were represented, we actually did pretty well. So we're about 52% across each of the schools across the district. So it's not like we just had certain pockets where we did really, really well with response rates and over others, pretty evenly distributed. So we feel with the 3,000 responses, we do have a pretty good picture of what our families are communicating to us about their concerns, about their needs going into reopening school. So the first two we're going to group together around communications. And one of the things that we learned here is of the families that responded, 380 families, or roughly 14%, have changed address in the last year. We have some wrong numbers, we have some disconnected numbers. So we clearly have some work to do to be able to know exactly who our families are that we need to follow up with. The next part that we learned along the way here is that.
If I could jump in real quick, Ross, if you
Yeah.
don't mind. Again, the spirit of everybody talking together to make sure we get the right message out. You notice, and again, 14% of our families basically get collected, it moved over the course of the past year. But we know that historically, typically, it's about 35%. So I guess in the spirit of another plea, families, please reach out to the school to make sure we have current information, to contact you, obviously going into the school year. And going into any school year, it's critical for us to be able to talk with one another and engage, this year even more so. So if you would please go online and update your information.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. The next big thing we learned here is that when we asked families, how would you like to stay in contact with us? And over half of them said, give us a call. We want a phone call. And we find that to be best. And the next most preferable way is a text message. And then third on the list was email. So when we think about how we reach out and stay in touch with our families, they're telling us, use your phone, please. That's our preferred method. So I just want to invite Aaron into the conversation. Just Aaron's leading our communications work group, and just brief insights on what the state is helping to frame for your work group.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Taking you up on that offer, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I think it's important to not only look at the 52% of the families who we reached, but also to consider it in context. I think when a family is asked, how do you want to hear from your school district, they're thinking, how do you want to hear about something serious that's going on with your child, how they're doing in school, et cetera. So obviously they don't want an email for that, they would like a phone call. But if it is to give an update on the strategic plan, like they certainly don't want a robocall that is 4 hours long. So I think it's important to look at it in that context. But the really important thing that we're seeing here is that they want that personal connection with our schools, of course. And in this day and age, there is this assumption that folks want everything to kind of be through apps or to be online. And it comes down to personal communication, just as one would hope, and those are the kind of relationships that we really like to foster. So that's got a point to shine. Actually, before we go on to that one, I do want to add that for the communications work group, when we're looking at reaching that additional 48%, we have representatives who are not only staff members, but we have family members, and we have kids, and we have recent graduates, and we have people from all aspects of the city. We have people who speak English, people who speak Spanish, and our core work is going to be re-envisioning what communication looks like from the district. If we have not been hitting 48% on something as important as the restart of school, how do we need to reimagine what we're doing? And I think we've got the creative minds at the table to do it. So we're pretty excited.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So the next item we'll just look at that we asked on the family survey is about meals. And so we asked, have you been able to pick up your meals throughout the course of the summer? And what we saw back here is represented. This looks a little bit differently. So just walk through, make sure you know what we're looking at, and then Jeff Hawks in the discussion here. So we grouped elementary together, and then middle school, and that's the center stack chart there, and then high school at the bottom. And red represents no, they have not been able to pick up meals, and it does apply to them. The gray in the center means it just doesn't apply to them. And then the yes and green means yes. So we can see just a little bit of comparison between our elementary and middle school and high school. And when we looked all together, that ended up being 772 families that said, no, we haven't been able to pick up meals this summer. So then we've got obviously a large percentage in gray that doesn't apply to, and then about equal percentages in green that said yes. So we know that school provides more services than just traditional academic services. And Jeff Hawks, I just want to invite you into the conversation, just some of the insights on this particular data and just some of how this informs your work group.
Thank you, Ross. Since the March 16th, the pandemic, our group in operations really gathered a team together and how we can make sure that our families in the city of Lorain, that our children are going to be fed. So we're very proud of what we were able to accomplish. But the biggest thing is the information that we received that somehow some of the families said no. And we met this week, and we have to find a way in order for us to be able to serve all our 18-year-olds and down. So we are working now with our MR, and we're going to get out there and find out what all we need to do, if it's some more stops or what have you. We are in that process of putting that plan together.
Thanks, Jim. And I can just speak very quickly to a couple of things. First of all, when you say that 772 families represents the no section, keep it, I guess, in terms of perspective, a third of our families don't need it, they're fine. But of the other 2/3, half of them want it, but don't have access to it. But also remember that 772 families is just representative of the 52% of the response that we had. So the number is obviously much, much larger than that. And this, again, this slide is not intended to be criticism, but I think with any planning monitoring, find out how we can be better. And what we recognize here is not just that there are some areas where we need to improve, but the question is why. And two of the big reasons is time of the day, times of the day, and locations. And we had a team of folks that worked together on this last week. Everybody was incredibly responsive, had great ideas. And I think Jeff's idea was, let's get another truck and we get our food services in great shape. And the money that we spent on that comes strictly from money that can only be spent on feeding children, but we can do a better job of feeding children. So again, I just want to applaud the team for looking at this, accepting the feedback, and reacting quickly. So good things are happening as a result of the information we gathered. And again, this is not because we did it wrong, it's because no one's ever done this before. We have to learn how to get better. So I just want to make sure to keep all that in perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, none of this is about blame at all. It's just where we are, and we always need to know exactly where we are, so we can learn from it, so we can make adjustments, and so we can improve. This is going to be us checking in, and we're going to need to check in again because we're going to make adjustments, and we're going to need to find out from our families: are we in a better spot now than we were before? And then again later, are we now in a better spot than we were before? So this is it's always a matter of just where are we, and what have we learned, and what can we do to improve based on what we learned. The next couple here connect to counseling and mental health appointments and then medical needs. And so again, kind of under the umbrella of schools providing more services than just a traditional kind of academic approach when we think of schooling, we asked our families, have you been able to maintain counseling and mental health appointments if that applies to you? And so you can see, again, same pattern as the prior with males, elementary, then middle school and high school at the bottom. Red means no, they've not been able to maintain their appointments. Gray means it didn't apply to them, and then the green is yes. And so you can see the numbers go correspond to that. And so what we learned here is that 1 out of 5 families that we were able to get in touch with said no, they haven't been able to maintain their counseling and mental health appointments, which works out to 504 families. On the next one, we asked now about medical needs specifically, and that's we are in the middle of a pandemic and want to check to see how healthy are you? Are you able to have your medical needs met? And so from this, the green, the 71.5% that says no, actually that means that they have been able to get their medical needs met. So that's actually good. And in the red, the yes, it's counterintuitive there. That 6.8% is that they have not been able to have their medical needs met. So that came to 178 families. And so Jeff Kruski, I want to invite you into the discussion. And so insights that you have for your team, we actually have 3 teams that you're working with right now to work to get started right away here on these items. So Jeff, you want to just add some of your insights and what your team's working on?
Perfect, thank you, Russ. The first thing I'm going to talk about is our social workers. Currently, we have 4 in district. We are adding 3 additional in the fall. What we realized looking at the data is we need to do better. And we need to connect directly with families to support the social, emotional, and the mental health needs. What our team talked about is how can we do this both in building and brick and mortar for sellers, or should be said here in building, but also to provide the support remotely. And so where we are as a team right now, the team is currently working on developing back to school supported videos to support families as well as children that if they do work in a remote environment. We also talked about what resources are available to the social workers to get out to the families. We are dividing our 7 workers up between 14 buildings, and they will be working directly with the administration and families to support. Additionally, there was the talk of food. There were some concerns that we are not meeting the needs of food. Currently, we will have a social worker that will be at every one of our pantries to provide that additional support to families, so they will be there to address any concerns. Additionally, our partner, and I think Danny mentioned this earlier, our partner, Second Harvest, has provided us with additional food for emergency opportunities. And so our social workers are currently developing a process to meet those specific needs. Another thing that I worked on is our school nurses. Again, addressing, and we have Mercy as our partner on this, and I'm thankful to have Katie as part of our team. And we talked about the needs not only being met in building, but how can we further support families at home. Mercy, we are in the process of putting together some protocols to support families so that families can actually do Zoom meetings to, instead of trying to get into one of the clinics. And so that is something I'm extremely excited about.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And to reiterate, I think something that Dr. Graham said earlier, all of these pieces are working their way into our plan. So this isn't just about a pick option A, option B, option C, but what actually happens with the personal support around more than just academics. And so we'll get in greater depth here coming up more. All of this connects into our plan. We're going to transition now into some technology items. So we asked our families, does your family have a computer or tablet that your child can use to access the internet? And so roughly 65% of our families said yes, they did. And roughly 35% of our families said no, they don't, which was 901 families that did not have a device or either a computer or tablet that they could use to access the internet.
So, Rob, add a little bit to that.
Yeah.
Additionally, there was a qualitative side of our survey too. So families that may have had a computer or tablet also highly identified the fact that they might have only had one, and they had needs of multiple children and or parents that are in college and they're fighting over that tech time as well. So that was a part. So when we talk about our data, it's not just the numbers that we looked at, or thousands of comments that we looked at as well. And the work is to then, once again, we can personalize our approach and give the support for our families that they need based upon what they said. I just want to take the opportunity to highlight that as well.
Can I interject too? As Dr. Graham was saying, and this is a third of the families who we were able to reach. So these are the families who either had access to the internet to take the survey online or had a stabilized home life to be able to answer that call and provide that data. Of the 48%, I mean, those are the folks who are keeping us up at night. How are we going to meet those needs? How do we know what those needs are?
Right, so all of this, we feel very good that we have a good start, but it is just a start. This isn't our ending point. So as Aaron started out earlier, we have to reinvent how we communicate so that we can have a much more complete picture and good partnership with 100% of our families, not 52% of our families. Yeah, no doubt about it. So with this then, I'm gonna go to the next one here as well, and we're gonna lump these couple together. So the next question then was, do you have reliable internet access that is not your phone? And what we found is, again, from the families that we were able to get in touch with, 85% said yes, roughly 15% said no, and that no was 387 families. Again, just the 52% that we were able to reach. And then we're gonna lump one more, and then Barb will invite you into the discussion here to offer some of your insights from your groups. So we asked, what's your preferred way to communicate with your child's teacher if in person is not an option? And the options here were phone or email. Dojo is a communication application, and then Google Classroom, which is a learning management system that the district has adopted. And again, you can see that phone was the preferred choice, and then Dojo is next, email, and then we've got some significant work here to do because Google Classroom has tremendous possibilities, capabilities. Many districts across the state have used it with very excellent success. And our families did not identify that as a preferred way. So we've got some work to do there. And Barbara, invite you into the conversation, some of the insights with your technology group, and then really dovetails in with Bill Reed, your instruction groups here as well.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. So from all of the data, we are looking to do three major things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create orientation videos for parents, students, staff that cover things like Google Classroom and going into Zoom and Class Dojo. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to train our teachers in all these different areas to be able, like have a beginning, an intermediate, and an advanced training. And then the third thing we're going to do is we're going to have a online learning handbook. So, parents will be able to see what the different expectations are. Because even though we have videos out there saying do this, that doesn't necessarily say what the expectation is. So, we have also looked at the data and, we try to come up with plans to respond to all of those things. One of the things that isn't showing here, the parents again and again said, we're okay with online learning, we just want it to be better than it was in the spring. And understanding that in the spring, gosh, that was like, from one day to the next, we were going from in-class teaching to not in-class teaching. And so we, with all these various trainings and having different levels of training, I believe we'll be able to, utilize the tools better and have things, function a little bit better. And with the handbooks, parents will be able to know exactly what's expected of them. In regards to the internet access, Rachel and Lorain are also, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes on internet access, so we can make sure that everyone has that. And in regards to devices, we are looking at a one-to-one, actually I should say we are going to a one-to-one for students to have devices. So students should come out of this with everything they need, and it's not just going to be like if there's 3 kids in a household, each of those children will have their own device. Did I miss anything?
One thing I wanted to add, Barb, is that you mentioned for teacher training on the software such as Google Classroom, but we also talked as well as providing that training to other staff members as well, including paraprofessionals who are also in the classrooms, in addition to other building staff members as well, which will be very helpful as we're working in this, whether it be a remote or a hybrid, whatever environment, but having everybody trained on using the technology will be very helpful going forward.
Absolutely. I think that was Carol. That was Carol, right?
Yes, thank you.
Well, yes, thanks. I think the other thing is that Sarah even Reeves, she ran with Bill a summer school, and we learned so much in that summer school. The summer school told us that, having a help desk available, a place where, maybe we have office hours, the help desk wouldn't just be for devices, the help desk would be for the online learning pieces, the software. And so we're going to also, besides having a handbook, orientation videos, and highly trained teachers, we're also going to have help desks available to help people along the way if there's a struggle. And so, I welcome any additional feedback we have. a number of groups that are working with me, a number of teams that are working with me, to get all this up and running. So if there's anyone who has any additional thoughts or anything that they've seen happening in other districts that they want to share with us, please email me or give me a call and push it back.
Barb, this option, not a qualifier, but just a follow-up. When you said parents said what to do better than we did in the spring, in the qualitative data, would they indicate what better was? Like what would qualify better? And then once we get better and have all these processes in place, what's the sustainability for the next 3, 4, 5 years?
I don't believe that the data said anything about what better meant. They just said, we're okay with having online learning. We just want it to be in better shape. And I sort of took that as we from one day to the next, took that leap. And, so much pride goes into the fact that I work with these wonderful people who, they just took off and they just did it and they made it happen. But they did it in all sorts of different ways. And so we're going to bring everyone back together and talk about that. And I have many work groups who are going into those details. As far as sustainability, I look at Google Classroom as something that a number of teachers, Melissa Sayers, Molly Tyson, so many teachers actually used it prior to COVID, and it made it so that students who were sick or missed a day or were out with, for whatever reason, talking to a counselor, they were able to catch up with their lessons, and it was sort of seamless. So I think that going through a Google Classroom process will be a really positive move, because we'll get everyone into that place where they're putting their lessons online now. If a substitute comes in, or if a child is sick or has an extended illness, they'll be able to stay in tune enough, stay in update with what's happening.
Thanks, Bob. Can I hop in just to answer Dr. Sampson's question just a little bit more? So we also ask questions under the umbrella of remote learning, and we're gonna show those, and they will go there now here with it, because it gets at a little greater depth than also for the questions you asked, and then also about the sustainability of it. So let's start with just what we learned a little bit more from our families about the remote learning experience, and then we're going to connect technology into that, and then we'll come back to the sustainability of it. So the first thing here is, did your child participate in online learning with their teacher the past spring? And 53% of our families across the district said yes, 27% no, 19.9% said sometimes. So again, we've clearly got some very significant work to do there. We need a much higher engagement rate from our families. And again, this is the 52% of families that we reach. This is not 100% of our families represented here, but clearly we need a much higher level of engagement with our families. We also asked in the survey, what were the biggest benefits of online learning in the spring? And so the options that our families had to choose from were the ability to work at their own pace. So you'll hear synchronous and asynchronous environment thrown out around remote learning, and the ability to work at their own pace and schedule is extremely important for our families to be able to balance all of the different things that are happening in their lives at that moment. So 55.75% of our families said that was a large benefit or positive remote learning. We've got some work to do. Learning options were appealing. Only 21.9% of families said that learning options were appealing. We've got some very significant work to do there. Teachers available to answer questions. 44% of our families said that was a positive of remote learning. While that's the second highest item there, we've also got some work to do there. Checking my child's progress online, 27% of our families said that they were able to do that. Again, this is a real opportunity for growth here, so we can much more meaningfully partner with our families. Barb referenced creating videos. Many of our families told us in the survey they did not know how to check their child's progress, and that was in the comments part that we read through. They wanted to help their children, they didn't know how. They wanted to know what they were supposed to be working on, they didn't know how. They wanted to know how they did on an assignment or what came out of a meeting with their teacher. They didn't know how. So this is part of Barb's work group that she has in this videos group to work and intentionally on the front end, partner with our families, say, here are tools that we're using. Here is how you can check your child's progress. Here is how we can better communicate with each other so that we can form a much tighter partnership. We also then asked what were the biggest challenges. And so no or limited access to the internet or computer. 31% of our families said that was their biggest challenge. Again, learning options were not appealing. So our families, it's not like they're saying learning options are really appealing. They didn't really answer real positive there. They also didn't say, no, this was a huge challenge. It just is kind of there. So we've got some work to do there. Teachers not available to answer questions, only 11.83% said that was a challenge. Again, knowing how to check my child's progress online. And then our largest one for this was actually none of the above. And this is to go a little bit deeper than to Barb and what she said. When we look through the comments, many of our families, we'll get to the themes of the comments coming up here in a few minutes. Many of our families said, we understand and we support remote learning, but it's got to be better. Now, in some cases, they did not define, back to Dr. Sampson, your point about better, but from a quantitative standpoint, we know that if we can help provide devices and internet to our families, it's going to be a better experience. We know that if we can have more appealing learning options for our students, it's going to be a better experience. We know if we can partner around how to check progress with our families, it's going to be a much better experience. So we have a number of clear paths forward with what our families told us here on the survey to give us a better experience. The second part of that is the sustainability, is that as we put together this plan and as we get into the larger strategic plan, we are going to absolutely define how we measure our own progress with the implementation of our plan. And when we measure progress of our plan, a lot of that is going to be designed around really what is it that we as adults are doing, and not from a threatening, like we're looking to get you, and not at all, but where are we now? What have we learned so far, and what can we learn from get better? And so the sustainability of that is going to be, look, we're going to spend time and effort here to support our teachers and staff as a whole to learn Google Classroom. Well, we can't just do that once. We have to provide initial support and then follow-up support. And then we need to check in again and ask, how's it going now? And we also need to survey them to ask them, how's it going with Google Classroom? What are you learning? What trouble spots are you having? What's going well with it? So the sustainability is going to be built into what we learn about the quality of our implementation. And frankly, that falls on us as a leadership team to create that environment where our staff can engage in a safe and a meaningful way, and that we can check and ask them and say, how are you doing? What helped you? So just a couple layers of depth, I think. And so Barb, thanks for that, and then going to the next few items. And then I want to invite Bill Aretha, if you'd like to talk just some of your insights then on what your group has been working on and how this data has kind of set you guys up for your work right now.
I wanted to add a little more onto what you and Barb were talking about as far as the family experience. And when I look back to the spring and I think about some of the comments that came our way, families, parents.
Hey, Bill, can you speak directly into your microphone, please?
Sure.
I can't hear you. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was sharing that some of the conversations that we had with families really led me to think that that they were struggling with, I don't know how to get them onto Google. What is this class link? How do we get into this Wonders program? How do we log into iReady? And there was quite a bit of communication coming from many different directions. So if I look back to the spring and I think about what some things that we could do better moving forward, it would be that communication with parents and providing some consistency and training on some of the materials and instructional pieces that will be used at home.
Just to add a little bit to that, anything that we're looking into right now, one of our biggest focus is does it have a parent component to it? Because at this stage of the game, we understand, especially when we start at K and go up, that parents are a large part of helping and assisting their child be successful. So how to get on the computer, how to log in, how to log out, how to turn in, how to access. When you have, a 6-year-old on the computer, it's really important that parents are engaged with that to help assist in them even getting on, and then with their lessons, whether it be synchronous at the time, and then there's questions later, or asynchronous where, there's a video the kid has to watch and then do some work around that. So it's really important that we make sure that our parents understand how to help their children. And then the great part about that is that we, that parents want to be better, they want to learn, they want to engage in their children's education. And so this kind of increases their capacity to be effective parents in helping their kids, as opposed to some of the things that I've been hearing, not only in our surveys and in Lorain, but just around, is that, I don't know how to do this. And so I think that they'll be very gracious in terms of increasing their capacity to be computer literate along with their students. So, and on this slide also, when we talked about the none of the above, it was really interesting because if the challenges weren't listed there, then they picked none of the above. So clearly there is a place here in this atmosphere where parents are saying, I had some challenges, but they're not listed here. So we want to make sure that we can even, in terms of helping parents educate their kids, is the thing that they're not saying here. What is it that we don't know that they want us to know? And that's just of the parents, again, that participated in the survey. So the 47% of the parents that didn't participate in the survey, why? What were their challenges? So we do have a lot of work to do around making sure that online learning is great for our kids.
And if I can add, so orientation videos, I've used the term so many times, I want to define it for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to take like a day in the life of a child at an elementary level, and a day in the life of a child at a middle school level, and then high school level. And what we're going to do is we're going to create videos, short little videos that say, when you are ready to log in, this is where you go. And so it'll be at an elementary school level, and a middle school level, and high school levels. Some of them will overlap for sure, but we really want to get it down to their levels, quick videos that are going to cover every piece of what it's going to take to have that communication with the teacher. Now, once they get in and they're working with their teacher might have preferences to one site or another. So then it's on the teacher to teach them, but we, through orientation videos, are going to show them and have that ability. Does that mean that the teacher's not going to also teach? No, they'll do that also, but this will be like in that interim. But we're almost trying to inundate them with just so many different ways of finding that information, so that, they have ways to look, or they can, go into the help desk, or they can speak with their teacher.
Yeah, thanks, Barb. Thanks, Aretha. Thanks, Bill.
I thank everybody for your constant jumping in and covering bases and clarifying and making sure we're building on each other's thoughts. But I also want to remind commission members and board members, if you have questions, don't wait to the end. Just kind of throw them out, and it's part of the dialogue. This is not intended to be a delivery, it's intended to be a conversation.
So the next question then was to our families, based on what you know right now, how comfortable would you be sending your child to school? And we had a range from very uncomfortable to uncomfortable to not sure to comfortable to very comfortable. And the chart that's up on the screen there combined the very uncomfortable and uncomfortable in red, not sure in yellow, and then the comfortable and very comfortable in green. And so we can see at the elementary level, 51% of our families said that they were uncomfortable, 29.98% said they weren't sure, 18.96% said that they were comfortable. You can see that number for uncomfortable increased in middle school to 58.98%. I'm not sure, 24.5%, and comfortable at 16.52%. And at the high school, you can see that uncomfortable number go up a little bit more to 60.2%, to 19.9% that are not sure, and then they're comfortable 19.9% again. So when we look across, clearly, in large part, our families are not overwhelmingly comfortable sending their children back to school right now. And we can see that there are some differences here, and we'll get into the comments here in a few minutes that help explain some of those differences. We also asked, what would prevent you from sending your child to school? And we wanted to check to see, were there differences between the district, the school, the class, and would it impact your decision at all? And what we learned here is that if a person in the district tests positive for COVID, 47.9% of our families said, yeah, that might be enough to keep my child home. If a person in the school tests positive, 75% of our families said that they would likely keep their child home, which was actually a little bit higher than class, 72.8%. There's really no difference there. So what we learned is that right now, based on what our families know, that if someone tests positive in the building, they're pretty likely to keep their child home. We only had 8.8% of our families say that COVID would not prevent them from sending their child to school. So there are pretty big implications when we look at this information and how we have to design our environment. And one of the things that's extremely important to us is that the environment we create is very flexible. Because we have to know that our families, for our families, for us as well, safety is our top priority, which means that if the family decides, and I promise you I'm not that interesting to hear, but you're not going and say it twice. That if our families are concerned about a child or a staff member testing positive in school, they're likely to keep their child home, which means we have to have a nimble learning environment that we can swing to right away. So we have to have options, we have to have flexibility so that our children can learn at home and in school, if we can get to that point, and that we don't have an interruption in learning. So it's an extremely important data point as we design the constructs for our plan. The next two we're going to group together. Actually, I think we're going to split them up. We've got one on extracurriculars, and then Madison will come back to extracurriculars. So we also asked about extracurriculars. We know that the experience at school, again, extends beyond just the traditional school day, and we know that clubs, activities, or sports are extremely important to the whole child development. So we asked, assuming we return to school in the fall, would your child participate in clubs, activities, and or sports? 32.7% of our families said yes, 41.1% said no, 26% said maybe. And if we can skip ahead just 2 slides, and we'll keep those together, and then we'll bring Brian in. So we then also asked, what are your biggest concerns about clubs, activities, and your sports? And so what we found is 52% of our families said being required to wear a mask, maintaining safe physical distance, 69.52% said that was a concern, and then sterilizing shared resources, 75% of our folks said that was a concern. So I want to invite Brian in. Brian's been working on this probably actually the longest with his group, going back to much earlier in the summer to start to prepare for fall sports and clubs, and then as part of a much larger group across the state. So Brian, if you don't mind offering some of your insights and what your group is working on, and then also maybe in a larger sense, if you don't mind commenting just on kind of a state level or regional level, the groups you're part of and what they're working on.
Yes, no problem. In early June, schools throughout the state of Ohio were provided with guidance to be able to open up the beginning of sports activities. This was done in phases. The phases were very intense. Early on, we began what was basically just conditioning and slowly built up to actual sports-related activities. In doing so, we have daily monitoring where we get temperature checks for every athlete, band member that before they participate at the very beginning. We also ask them a series of questions in an effort to try to gauge whether or not they potentially had contracted COVID. We then go into our activities and the process of doing the activities. We're sterilizing the equipment periodically throughout the activities, and there's certain things with the existing protocol that we're able to do, certain things that we aren't able to do. But ultimately, it's allowed us to create what I believe to be the safest environment possible for the kids to be able to have activities. Up until this point, we're still in what would be deemed as phase 2 of the protocol. There is a phase 3 that we hope to be in sometime in the near future, but obviously whether we end up there or we don't, the people that are guiding us are individuals at the state and local level, healthcare professionals, the Ohio High School Athletic Association, obviously the governor, and they will determine when we're ready to be in what would be that next phase. Currently, we are not. We are officially starting the fall sports season in this weekend, in early next week, the sport. But in doing so, our contacts for our sports that are being contact sports, they are still not able to compete outside of the actual team themselves. So we'll continue to do inter-squad work, workouts and things of that nature until we receive word that we're able to do something beyond that. But the kids have been unbelievable. The coaches have been unbelievable. One of the things that we can definitely take away from this is we are creating very good habits for our kids. When they leave our facilities, when they leave our field, when it comes to wearing the masks, making the effort to wash your hands, sanitize, so on and so forth. And I think it's really going to help them when they're away from all the programs and they're off on their own. So I'm really proud.
All right, thanks, Brian. And if we go to one slide prior then, just to take a look at masks. So we asked our families, would you support your child being required to wear a mask in school? And you can see some differences by level again. So same pattern with elementary first, and middle school in the middle, and then high school at the bottom. And so 23% of our elementary families said no, they would not support their child being required to wear a mask. 18.5% said maybe, 58% said yes. And then on the high end of high school, 70% of our families said yes, they would support their child being required to wear a mask. 68.89% in the middle, and then 12.95% said no. So again, very informative as we look at the environment that we need to create as part of our plan development. So going at a couple then, getting into comments. So as Dr. Graham said before, we had a couple thousand comments, which was fantastic. So we wanted the number side, but we also wanted people just to tell us, what they're thinking, their biggest questions, about a return to school, their biggest concerns they have. And so what we did is we read through every single comment. So we read through every single comment that was made, and then we looked to categorize them into themes that emerged from the comments. And at the elementary school level, there were 5 main themes that emerged. And so the first one was technology and online learning. Dr. Sampson, back to your question earlier. Families want to know what technology is going to be available to them. Again, roughly 35% of our families said they did not have a device that they could use. And so I think Michael referenced earlier, that was by family. We need to make sure that it's by child. So each child has a device to use. And they want to know how to use it. So as Barb mentioned earlier, we're going to do a series of orientation videos and support. So specifically for our families. And now we know much better how they like to be reached, so we can stay in contact with them to help them to be able to partner in a better way. The next main theme was how I balance homeschool life while working. So a number of our families communicated to us in the elementary level that they have some very difficult decisions to make when it comes to their own job and then childcare for their children and how they balance that. So that was a large number of comments, and that was our second theme. Health, child, and family appeared numerous times again. So families are concerned. How healthy is their child going to be? And when they come home, are they going to bring something with them that could infect the rest of the family? And then the last one, mask concerns. And so this came up largest in elementary, although it came up at all 3 levels, but largest in elementary. A number of family members indicated that their child has asthma, and they're not sure then how their kids can keep the mask on all day. So those are the main themes from the elementary comments. At the middle school level, the themes really coalesced around 3 areas. So medical and family together, and I think just the example here is that, I live with my parents, we have other kids at home, some are at risk, my spouse is at risk. There's just a general fear of bringing something home and endangering them. So that was a major theme. The second theme was that our middle school family said they would rather have their child in school, but if it's online, it has to be better than what we did last spring. And then masks, again, came up as a concern in a similar manner as elementary. At the high school level, there were, again, really 3 main themes that emerged. And there was a clear sense of fear from families. There's also some fairly recent publications that show that students there kind of 10 seems to be the hinge point, and up tend to transmit COVID at very similar rates as adults. So we're actually not too surprised by this. So families are very well aware of how COVID is transmitted. So they're concerned about what could happen if students or staff test positive and their own safety then. Masks was a concern again. And there was a very strong penchant for online learning, but it needs to be improved again from what children experienced in the spring. Pat, I want to just invite you if you have comments that you'd like to share as being a part of that group going through and read the comments and some of that analysis.
Yeah, and I guess to get back to Mr. Sampson's earlier question, with the advocacy for online learning and the kind of request that we get better at it, 2 themes really emerged. And, there were kind of generalized comments around the notion of it didn't work that well for my child. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're so bullish on the notion of putting 3 weeks of training, 3 weeks of support in front of a nice long runway for our teachers, so that they can feel as confident and capable in delivering engaging online instruction as possible. But also, and Ross, you hit on this earlier, this notion that parents didn't necessarily feel like they had the tools in their tool belt to support their kids. So their child can't log into Google Classroom. Can the parent help reset that password? Do they have that capability? Can they check progress? Can they help monitor? Can they help support? I think there were some themes from our parents around needing some training. And so when we look at training our teachers, we're obviously going to be putting a lot of resources around making sure our parents are included in that, feel they're feeling trained and coached up on that process.
Yeah, thanks, Pat.
Hey, Ross.
I have a quick question for you.
Yep.
Dr. Sampson, real quick with the masks, I've noticed that's a theme throughout the levels. So a couple things. Do you guys have a body of research that talks about kids with disabilities, specific disabilities that masks will be an issue for? And then we can identify those kids obviously who have disabilities. So I don't know if there's a research body that states what specific disabilities would affect kids with breathing with masks. And then the second part is, are kids asked to bring their own masks currently, whether it's extracurricular activities or on premises or whatever case is, or are masks provided for them?
Can we actually bring Jade into the conversation on this? If that's okay. Jade, can we bring you into the conversation on this to talk about Dr. Sampson's question?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So in terms of students with disabilities and masks, it really is an individual case-by-case situation. There might be students who have medical needs that would be impacted by wearing masks. So there might also be students that have been diagnosed with autism, where the sensory issues might come into play. So there's no kind of blanket answer for that. It's an individual determination that will be made, but we have been working on looking at which students individually might have some needs in those areas so that we're prepared. And we're looking at different options, for example, face shields for students who perhaps have difficulty wearing a mask, as well as the, I don't know what the medical term for it is, but the other face shields that go up across the face instead of down on, like something on your head that comes down like a headband. So just really looking at all the different options and what will work for each individual student.
Dr. Graham, do you mind talking a little bit about just with the health commissioner and the number of barriers in place for safety?
Again, I think it bears repeating in several times. First of all, Dr. Sampson, your question, if students are required to be here, we will provide masks, and obviously there will be some protocols on monitoring those masks. But again, you see us taking off our masks when we speak. And again, based on the information from our local health commissioner, again, I want to give a shout out to Dave Coble, our health commissioner, and Mercy Health, who have been incredible partners throughout this process, as they help us interpret the data provided by the CDC, Ohio Department of Health, and the Ohio Department of Education, on how to implement these things the right way. Mercy Health has had one of their team members in all of our meetings. We meet constantly. But to Ross's question, the way it's described is if I have a mask on, that's a barrier. If Michael has on a mask, that's a second barrier. The 6 feet between us is a third barrier. At all times, there needs to be a barrier. So again, so as we plan whatever our return to school looks like, we have to make sure that we're cognizant of that. At all times, we have to make sure that there's at least a barrier. And again, that's not just the academic side, as Brian Corey mentioned earlier, it's all the extracurricular things we're doing as well.
Long as hand washing, our sanitary practices as well. We have to keep doing all of those recommendations that have been given to us from our health professionals, regardless of the situation that we're in. So if we're in classroom spaces, those things that Dr. Graham just mentioned, along with washing hands and masks and appropriate manners. If we're talking about extracurriculars, it's the same process. If we're talking about changes in dismissal and entry, those same practices are necessary. And the body of research that guide us are the health professionals and everything that's been released there. So we also know that with that, things change too. So not only do we have to be technical in our approach, we have to be adaptive. This virus is changing every day. There's trends and we have to be responsive. We have to lean on the health professionals. None of us around this table right now are city health professionals. But we do have to follow the guidelines that are presented to us to the best of our ability to ensure that safety to the best of our ability. So I just want to add that little context as well.
Josh, can I lighten the mood just a little bit?
Please.
Throughout this presentation, there are some really powerful images. And those are our kids and those are our families. And we wanted to make sure that interspersed with all of this is that reminder that, okay, we didn't hurry because we're thinking about our people. So thanks to TV20 and Eric Bonser for these amazing images of our people.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So that's the listening that we've done so far. So we start out by listening to our staff, we've listened to our families, and let's transition then into some of the actions that we've taken, and then we'll get into deeper to look at the concept that we have for plan. So based on the listening, the immediate actions that we've taken. Last week, Dr. Graham, and then in partnership here with the leadership team, announced that we're going to push back the start date of school for students from August 20th to September 8th. It's a very intentional pushback to 3 weeks, and we base that 3 weeks very heavily on Dr. Graham, Michael, and my experiences in Canton City, which last year when we immediately needed to transition to a remote environment, it took us just under 3 weeks to transition, to provide staff training to our staff, to engage with our families, to figure out their needs, and to then have a very legitimate run of remote learning. So we're basing that 3 weeks on prior experience that we've had, and we're very confident with the teams that we have right now in place that 3 weeks is gonna allow us to provide very meaningful, engaging training for our staff, also for our families, and give us time to practice, to adjust, to go through safety protocols, to engage with our families, do kind of a phased-in opening. So that's why that very intentionally went from August 20th to September 8th to give us that 3 week period. So extended staff PD then from 3 days to 3 weeks. We are developing remote learning resources. Barb talked about that earlier. She's going to talk in greater depth with Bill and Aretha here coming up about some of the very specific accomplishments so far, their groups, and also some of the things that they're still working on. We removed the dress code requirement, again, based on comments that came from our families in the survey. We revised band eligibility and some of the protocols for athletics. We are purchasing staff laptops, so every staff member should have a laptop. Every student should also have a device. And again, we'll get into greater detail with some of the specifics of that. Barb will talk to that a little bit later.
So I do want to bring out the emphasis of staff laptops. It doesn't say teacher. It says staff. So the supports that our students get accustomed during the traditional school day, we want to equip all staff members to be able to connect with our students. That was a big part of the data that came out, that people felt as though the connectivity, and we had some staff that were really working tremendously hard during this time to connect. We also know that there were other areas, whether we're talking about paraprofessionals and such, that need to reach our students in a consistent basis. When we talk about the purchasing of staff laptops, that does include all staff. It does get to the equity and access for our staff. Oftentimes when we talk about equity and access, we look at it through a student lens. There's also organizational equity that we need to address, and this is just one way of doing that. So just like everyone has a place where they hang their hat or their coat when they come to work, we want to make sure that they can do that relative with technology.
It's really important to us that as we find barriers, we can remove them. And so a barrier for staff access to technology, we've got to remove that barrier. Barrier around student access to internet connectivity and an actual device, we've got to remove that barrier. So it's really important that as we do this, we're looking and trying to be very intentional to make sure that our approach is equitable for, as Michael said, not just students, but it's staff as well. All right, let's go a little bit deeper then. So let's talk about then how we have spent some of the CARES Act money. So Rachel T., if you guys don't mind walking us through this.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So as you can see on this slide, we have received a little over $4.3 million in CARES Act money. And the way that that has been budgeted is look at the top of the slide, the salaries and benefits, about $943,000. That amount is the amount that our budget, our general fund budget was cut, and the governor had to make cuts to education this past spring. And so we used the CARES Act to offset continuing to compensate our staff through March and June of 2020. The second, or actually the largest chunk of the CARES Act money, $2.2 million, is going to purchase staff and student computers as well as internet access. We have a smaller amount, $37,000, that has helped us with postage and envelopes to send out the learning packets that we used this past spring. And then $190,000 for the purchase of personal protective equipment, so sanitizers, masks, face shields. And then $105,000 for professional cleaning services and the installation of what is known as sneeze guards, those are those plastic barriers that have been installed in all of the offices of our schools. And then we set aside $173,000 to compensate our staff who have assisted this summer with reaching out to families to make calls to get participation on the survey, as well as our staff who, during their non-work time, have helped participate in work groups. And then a small amount is for our indirect or our administrative costs, and that's at $67,000. And then the last amount is $340,000 that we are required to set aside for our non-public schools. Those are the schools where we have Lorain City School students who attend. And so as you can see there at the bottom, thus far we've actually spent a little over $1 million. And then we have open purchase orders of about $1.9 million. I do want to say that although we do have $1.2 million that we haven't spent or that we haven't opened a purchase order for, all of the funds have been accounted for. We are still in the process of identifying the best option for providing internet access at home for our families. And we are also looking at purchasing some additional laptops just to make sure, we already have enough for every child to have one, but in case you have repair issues or they get forgotten at home, that we have some extra in our schools. And so we are very grateful to be exploring options with the state for a matching grant program that will help us with the purchase of the additional internet and computers that we're looking into purchasing. Did you add anything?
Okay, so I think that was a good summary.
Thank you.
Hey, Rachel, this is Patty O'Brien.
Yes, okay.
Hi, Rachel. A question about the family survey staff cost.
Yes.
Can you just tell me about how many staff that will cover? And I assume that, and maybe a baseline of what an average stipend would be for them?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but we anticipated that we wanted each staff member to really make about 15 calls. And we looked at the union negotiated rate for our teachers, including the required benefits, is roughly $35 an hour. And so we wanted everyone to have enough time to make those calls. So I believe we allocated 20 hours for each person that volunteered. And in order to reach out to everyone, we needed roughly 400 volunteers. And then we added some extra costs. We have some principals who coordinated getting volunteers, or staff who were willing to make the calls. They weren't completely volunteer because we did compensate them. But then we do have a number of teachers, we've had some paraprofessionals, as well as principals who've been a part of all of our work groups to give their feedback. And so they, depending on their daily rate or their hourly rate, so those are all the factors that went into that amount.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's transition to where we are now. And so analyzing the family survey results was hugely important to us. We have to listen. Again, listen to understand so we can be very clear about what our families are telling us their needs are, what their expectations are going forward. So where we are now is really all throughout and especially now, we've been working to partner with our health commissioner. Dr. Green, you want to talk just in depth more about that now, or do you want to talk later? Yeah, go ahead. Or you want?
Go ahead, please. We'll talk about it.
Okay, all right, so we'll get that later. And then get into the first draft of the plan. So all of the work that we've done at this point goes into our plan. What we wanted to do was listen, identify our needs, be true to a process so that we can be extremely comprehensive and thorough based on what our staff is telling us, based on what our families are telling us. What we did not want to do is put together a plan in isolation, guess, and then find out we're wrong. So this has been, and maybe for some of you, you're thinking this meeting is long. This has been a relatively long and yet quick process. Because what other districts started doing, and this is not meant to be in any way disparaging of a prior leadership team, other districts had the benefit of starting the plan as a leadership team in March for the following year. We've been working on this for the last 3 weeks. So our timeline has been very compressed. We did not want to cut corners. People's health and well-being is at stake, and we cannot shortchange our process, which we realize for many folks in the community, this has not been a pleasurable experience waiting for us to say, here's what the plan is. But we have to make sure we listen. If we don't listen, we are more likely to get it wrong. So we thank everybody for their patience as we've been working to get to this point here, where we can then talk about some of the specific actions now that our work groups are putting into our plan. So what you're going to see is our first draft of our plan. We're going to have work group reports, and then we'll talk about what our hoped for, I should say, maybe frame it that way, because we've got a couple more steps to our process, plan looks like. So what we're gonna do is we'll walk through each of our work groups, and the pattern is gonna be what we know right now and what we don't know yet. So the information, you'll see 2 columns on the screen, very clearly what we know, and these are some very specific things from our work groups, and then what we don't know yet, and the key is yet, because we have to find out answers to these before we can really solidify our plan. So the first one, and we're just gonna work in that through an alphabetical order here, is communication. So Erin, if you don't mind talking us with your group, what you guys know and don't know yet.
As I alluded earlier in the introduction, we know how our staff and families prefer to communicate. At least we know how they prefer to communicate of the ones who we were able to communicate with, which is the challenge. In this process, we know that, and we've always known this, our contact data is incomplete. People's lives are complicated. People are moving, they're getting new cell phone numbers, their emails are changing all the time. During a pandemic, it's even more complex. We know that there has been a ton of movement. Does anybody know our mobility rate offhand?
Just shy of 35%.
Just shy of 35%. So at the beginning of a school year, 35% of a teacher's classroom might look completely different than at the end of the school year. Not to mention the movement that happens here during the summer. And we need to be able to respond to that. We need to be able to meet those families' needs. One of the ways we're doing that is reaching out aggressively with reminders, and thank you so much to our family groups, to our partnering organizations who are helping us get the word out that we need that updated information. And we've had a ton flowing in. So we're very thankful for that. We still aren't reaching that 40% of families. Can't emphasize that enough. We know that we are getting better at communicating with our families who speak Spanish. We are very thankful to the help of our bilingual staff members, our translators, our partnership through El Centro, who's able to help connect us with folks and give us that feedback. And we also know that communication, no matter what form it is, whether it's on the website, through social media, it needs to be accessible with people's mobile phones. A lot might change, but that little device in your hand, that packs a lot of information. And if we can make sure that it is translatable and really easy to read and really easy to hear there, then we're doing something right. But what we don't know, how to reach that 48% of families that we didn't hear from. And that's where we're going to rely upon our team stakeholders from throughout the community, throughout our school learning community, to help us get that done. And we also don't know the needs of those who we have not heard from yet. So for those who are listening in and for those who have friends and family, please help them to get connected. Go to our website, lorainschools.org, to update that information, or call our registration offices to do so.
All right, let's go to human resources. So Carol, do you mind talking us through your group and what we know and don't know yet?
Ross, I'm so sorry. Carol, I'm so sorry.
Okay,
I also want to give a shout out to the fact that we have the media here today. They have hugely instrumental in helping us reach out to our community members who are not online. Like for instance, my parents, if it is not in that newspaper, it did not happen. It does not exist. And so we're really thankful to have our local journalism, keep local journalism alive so they can help keep our community informed.
Before we move on, this is Patty again. So if you all are, looking to reach the 48% of families that you haven't heard from yet, is there a timeline where you're just going to have to stop and move along with the information that you have to finalize the plan?
Actually, the short answer is yes, and the reality is the plan has to continue. And we'll put our plan together, and then as Ross mentioned earlier, we'll adapt to whatever changes come. And to the point that Erin made earlier, we know that 35% of our families are transient, move throughout the course of the year. And I believe Ross said earlier, throughout the course of the plan, whether we finalize something this week, next week, the week after, it has to be fluid because the needs of our families are going to constantly change, and we have to make sure we're adaptive to meet those needs. So yes, well, great. We don't need the other 48% of our families to make the decision. 52% is a nice turnout for gathering information. But again, when it comes down to specific information like The 48% that we didn't hear from, we don't know if they need a device, they're gonna get a device. We don't know if they need internet, we don't need, so we have to find out how we can meet their individual needs.
And here's the rub.
And I certainly didn't mean that to sound harsh, like,
No, it's fine.
maybe, cut off, like, okay, these families don't count, or whatever, that was not my intent in my comment. My thought was more of, just in your efforts to be so thorough, which I appreciate so very much, and I'm sure everyone else does as well, there comes a point where you just gotta, and you know that, you just kind of have to move ahead and keep your fingers crossed that you know enough to make an informed decision.
And I think we do. I think we have enough information to make an informed decision and what recommendation this evening on some specifics with a couple of gaps in information so we can lock some things in. But yes, to your point, we have enough information to move forward. We still need to contact and meet those parents or those families to find out what their individual needs are to make sure they're met.
And here's the rub, like our reality is constantly shifting. I mean, not only with the COVID situation, but the ways that we communicate, how people are feeling about returning to school. And as Ross was talking about, that's why the communication cycle, the flow of listening and sharing and creating plans and then saying, okay, does this work for you? And listening again is an ongoing process. It isn't like, okay, we've got our communications plan, we are done. It's constantly transforming because people are constantly transforming.
And I do appreciate about the survey, the fact that we do have the contact information for the family so we can follow up on those specific items and needs of the specific families that they've identified and able for us to make that personal outreach.
I appreciate that, Carol. And it's not just, and I think I mentioned in my ramblings, to find out if they need a device or if they need internet. But as we talked about earlier, and also are your mental health needs being met? Are your trauma needs being met? Are you eating? There are so many things that we provide at school that go beyond the core courses. And we need to make sure that our families have what they need to get through this stuff.
So Carol, you want to walk us through what your group has accomplished so far and then what we still need to learn?
Absolutely. So looking at our list and what we know from the information that we've been reviewing and the questions that we've been answering, what we know is criteria for when staff and students should and shouldn't come on site, protocols for when staff and students become ill while at the school building, onboarding procedures for new staff during this unique pandemic time, professional learning for staff prior to the start of the school year that we've already mentioned, and that's for all staff, which is great because everybody needs professional development in these times. Next is how will we address collective bargaining agreement needs? How will we conduct the hiring process? And that we've been conducting throughout this summer, and we've been using the virtual process, keeping folks safe, socially distant, and still being able to maintain, obtaining and retaining quality staff members. And then also expectations for employees who are working from home remotely. So those are the items that we know from our research and our meetings. Then we can identify what we don't know from our team meetings. So what we don't know, and what Dr. Graham already alluded to, is exactly which staff will be on site, doctor's notes to be submitted to HR. So after this meeting, just as a follow-up, I'm gonna send an additional email to all staff members, just as a reminder, because I know some folks will be watching this virtually, while others may not. So just as a follow-up reminder to get that information to us as soon as possible. Next on what we don't know is the final protocols for when staff and students become ill at school that's not COVID-19 related. So I know that the nursing staff is working on some different procedures on students who get ill at school or sprain an ankle versus someone who shows COVID-19 symptoms. And they have a good handle on that, but those are things that we're going to be learning as we go along. Next is actually dealing with sports and athletics, how supplemental contract timelines will be modified. So as the information that we receive changes daily, a lot on sports and et cetera, our supplemental contracts will be affected, and those are kind of things that will be to be determined. as we go along. Implications on the teacher evaluation system called OTES. We are continuing to use as a district the OTES 1.0 model for this school year, but there have been a lot of questions about how will OTES be impacted if teachers are teaching virtually? What will that look like, and how will we make accommodations to make that happen? Next, what we don't always know is the staffing level needs. It depends on which plan we go with and how many students come to school. We may look at some different staffing levels as needed throughout the year. And then if any job descriptions will need to be revised to align with new expectations. And that could be some job descriptions in the cleaning department, various things like that, things that we might not know because we don't know what to expect yet. I think that's it for HR.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. All right, so let's transition. Bill Aretha, if you don't mind walking through the nodes and then the not nodes yet on for the instruction group.
I just want to start by acknowledging the great team that we had to work with. We reached out to quite a few folks, and we got about 14 teachers, principals, staff on our team, and there was not one hesitation about jumping on board and participating. So thanks to everyone that you saw on the previous slide. Some of the things that we know are that staff PD will be held from August 17th through September 4th. Instructional staff can expect access to the same instructional materials that we had before school closed. So there will be additional tools, but we wanted folks to know that if you had it at the end of the last school year, it's not being taken away or replaced with something different. Google training that Barb just talked about a little while ago will be provided. That'll be things like Google Classroom, Google Docs, Sheets, and the entire suite that we have. We'll leverage our internal staff and their knowledge base first, and then outsource as needed. And we'll offer a remote learning option. Principals will create building-specific plans based on district guidance. And those are things such as arrival dismissal, cafeteria, procedures, moving through hallways. We will have parent-teacher conferences and back-to-school nights. And we will have training for parents to support children at home. And families can expect clear and consistent guidelines with respect to remote learning.
And thank you, Bill. And yes, so the things that we know, I mean, we really thought about before we even went into that to decide what do we really know. And so I just want to add a little bit more to what we know when we talk about staff PD from the 17th to the 4th. I mean, we want to really ensure that our staff is very clear and understand how to engage with our kids, whether it be synchronous or asynchronous, in their educational experience. Also, we talked about a lot of platforms to use, and Google is one of the ones that a lot of our staff are familiar with, as well as Zoom. And so we're exploring some of that, but we know that we want our staff to have, because some staff decided that they were more comfortable with Zoom than they were with Google. And so as Bill said, we're not going to take away what they're comfortable with, because we want them to go in and really be well-versed in what they're using and be comfortable with what they've used in the past, as well as what we're going to be training on for this year. So some of the things that we don't know, areas teachers need training on in terms of existing online tools. So in the survey, there were some teachers that were good at Google, some good at Zoom, and then they didn't cross over and back and forth. And so what do you want to know? How good are you? And to kind of tie that into what we already know, we found out that there are teachers that can teach a lot of these things. So we're going to tap into them. We're going to make sure that we use the experts that we already have here at Lorain City Schools to not only present PD, but to be a colleague to follow up, because what we know about PD is that the one shot, one time, sit and get doesn't work. So how do we follow up and make sure that we're supporting our teachers? We don't know what class transitions will look like. You know, it's by school, it could be by school, it could be how are we gonna move kids from one place to the next? And there are a lot of suggestions about how to do that. You know, do the teachers transition, do the kids transition? And we really have to look at that. The budgeting costs for training. In 3 weeks, we're gonna do a lot of training, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that we use our in-house experts. But then we outsource for those things that we don't know. And so we don't know what the budget for that is going to be. But at this stage of the game, you know, I don't think it matters per some people that I know. So, and also what the remote options will be. So there's opportunities for certain subjects to be completely online, where kids can kind of just log in and there's no teacher, and they just watch the video and they learn how to do it. There are other opportunities for remote learning. So we're not sure what those are gonna be yet. We just know that what we do know is that whatever it is, that there will be specific training, and we're gonna make sure that our staff is very comfortable with going in with online learning so that our parents can say, yes, I'm pleased, because those are our customers and those are the people that we want to be very secure with what we're doing in the education that their kids are getting in Lorain City schools.
All right, thanks guys. All right, let's go to operations next. So Jeff Fox, you don't mind coming back in the conversation and walk us through what your group and many groups have been working on.
Thank you, Ross. Everybody said, what we know, PPE, how clean our buildings. We have been cleaning our buildings all summer, according to the CDC, Ohio Department of Health, with all the proper guidelines. Visitors procedures, those will be in place for each building. We will get all that information out to our parents through our communication. Transportation accommodations, so our dismissal guidelines. We have been in contact and meetings with our first student transportation department. Breakfast and lunch guidelines, we are working on that. We have the proper distancing with our children. Restroom procedures, yes, those will also be clean. Our cleaners will be working during the day, so that way we are making sure that we are constantly wiping down the surfaces that we need to. Main office procedures, we do, like was mentioned earlier, we do have those glass protective between our employees and our visitors. But we don't know yet how many students have to be on site or off site. We are working with that, Dr. Graham, with this team. How much PPE is needed? We have purchased some of the PPE, but still, and what term that we use in operations is the burn time. How much will be used? And, so we have to make sure that we do have enough. Which rooms will need to be repurposed and how? Those we have had some discussions in that. Route needs, that's the walking, the pathways that we properly need to get in place, meet with the principals, so we can discuss that and have the proper markings or distance and for that. Right dismissal adjustments by building, those will need to work out by building and also transportation. Breakfast and lunch counts on site versus off site. Again, this all has to do, we're waiting to see how, the children, the number of our children that will be coming comfortable, that they will be coming back. So we make sure that we are doing what we have to do as a district for the safety and the feeding and educating our students.
Jeff Fox, you just did such a good job. I want everybody to have some perspective that when it came to the operations work groups, there were probably 10 pages worth of slides just because there's so much that is encompassed within this umbrella. And I was like, oh, how am I gonna shorten this up? And we're just about to have a board meeting. So I was really, really concise. And this is the first time Jeff Hawks has seen it. So thanks for being very flexible with that. You did great.
Thank you.
Jeff, this is Patty. How are you?
Thank you.
Question, when you say what we know about transportation accommodations, you mean, how kids would be bused to school?
Yes, Eddie, what we need to know is what kids are going to be coming to school, so we can do all the proper routing, so we're picking up the kids, for each school.
Do you know how many kids you can have on a bus?
It's, according to the CDC guidelines, it's one per seat.
If I can intervene, according to,
And
again,
how many kids can you put on, if it were normal times, how many kids can you put on a bus?
Elementary, I want to say, off the top of my head, 72, and high schoolers, like 46, junior high.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, so then let's go to Jeff Karuski, if you don't mind walking us through. Then again, you've got multiple groups going here, but what your groups know so far and what we don't know yet.
Perfect, thank you. I too would like to start out though by saying thank you to the commitment of all my team members and their clear understanding of what it means to serve the children and community of Lorain. So just to make sure I shout out my team. The social emotional support will be available to adults and students on site and off site. That's currently being worked on through our social work. I reinforce will be needed. Code of conduct needs to be addressed non-compliance with safety procedures. As we look at the principles, and this falls within the principal spectrum, the concern is to make sure that we are providing the safest environment to put our parents at ease. And so that is something that we have made a significant investment for. PBIS needs to support online learning. Traditional dress code requirements will be waived. With that being said, we also still want to make sure that appropriate dress attire decorum is a part of our conversation. What we don't know is what social emotional supports off-site will look like. And again, that is where we as social workers are guiding into the data and connecting with public agencies to support. What reentry supports will look like, what PBS method will be used for online learning, promoting kindness and understanding for those staff and children who cannot wear a mask for their specific circumstance. And that was, I have to tell you, that was one of the conversations that we wanted into great depth on, is to understand that there will be children that are in positions where that can't happen, and we have to work towards understanding and support tolerance. And that's something that we are working towards.
Great, yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Jane, if you don't mind walking us through then student services and the work that you guys have done, what you know and don't know yet. Well, I'm pretty good at wait time, but I can't wait any longer. Jane, are you there? All right, well, why don't we go to Barb with technology, and then we'll come back to Jane. All right, Barb, you want to walk through what your group has done so far?
Yeah, checking that I was on mute. So we'll be distributing iPads to all pre-K through first grade students and laptops to all second through 12th grade students. The internet and Wi-Fi will be provided to ensure equitable access to all families. So we're working with Spectrum, we're working with the Sprint to 1 Million project. We haven't decided, we're just moving forward with it. Staff will engage in 3 weeks of professional learning. And that's going to be, what we're going to do is we're going to run something called an ed camp, and ed camp makes it so that if I, as a teacher or a staff member in general, have a specific question, I can put it out there, and someone who is knowledgeable on that can just assist me. So there'll be like formalized training, but there'll also be the, hey, I just want to get this piece, how do I get help with this? And so, a lot about just conversation and being kind to each other in regards to what we do and don't know and helping each other. Help desk helpline will be used, so the actual IT department that distributes the devices and handle all the devices will have help desk, and then we'll have more hotline or like office hours, so that people can call in or go into a Zoom and we can just step them through. What we don't know is the device backup plan right this second. So Rachel had referred to the fact that some monies would be looked at to kind of backload devices. So the concern was if all the students have the devices, what happens if the student comes to school without that device? So we're looking at having a backup plan for that, which we need to finalize that. And then the internet Wi-Fi thing, we have all these different options right now on the table, so we know it's gonna happen, we just don't know the exacts around it.
All right, thanks, Barb. Jane, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, great. Do you mind walking us through just what your groups have accomplished so far and what you still don't know yet?
Sure. Well, what we know is that we are still meeting timelines in terms of evaluations and activities, and we will continue to do so. As we were thrown in this in March, we kind of have figured out our fly, and I think we have really long way. And I actually believe that we have had an increase in parent involvement in the IEP process for sure. Through Zoom and other phone calls, as we compared to what we did in person. So that kind of was a positive thing that came out of the process that we went through in March during the shutdown. We will continue that process, making sure that we meet all those timelines. We know that students will need accommodations, whether we are on site or a hybrid or full online. And we will continue to provide those accommodations through the intervention specialists. We know that we will have some different needs for students in terms of face shields, plexiglass partitions, and those kinds of things. We know that we need to continue to collaborate with parents on the special education services that we're providing. We need to look at how students will be engaged in each learning option. I think what we are still trying to work out is how we will better work towards progress monitoring of IEP goals, and also the RTI and referral process that usually happens in a normal school year will have to be looked at and developed. And documenting the service delivery that we do provide for students is something that we also need to work through as our group continues this work. Early assessments will be completed. They'll be done with the school psychologists and one-on-one testing sessions, and so that process actually we do already know about. And then working at how we can better utilize our paraprofessional and teacher relationships in whatever option instruction is being provided. One other thing I would add is also what we need to work through is finding better ways to reach our gifted learners as we look at our reopening plan.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. All right, so that's the work that our work groups have done to this point, which then gets us next to then our delivery options that we have. So when we think about, really there are three options that we have for how we provide service delivery to our students. And in person, let's make sure we're just clear on the definitions for these. So in person would mean staff and students are on site in the buildings and classrooms for learning every day, with safety protocols in place. Hybrid, staff and students are on site some days and are engaged in remote learning from home some days. Full remote, staff and students are engaged in remote learning from home each day. So those are our three main service delivery options that were really are open to us. So as we go, yeah, go ahead.
Ross, before we go to the next slide, we are getting a lot of comments and questions through Facebook and through YouTube. It's more than we can address in this particular format. So we'll be addressing those and getting them out to all of those askers through a link on the website. And Dr. Graham, do you want to talk about another option that Elena is putting together? Is it not quite time?
I'm not sure it's time, but you kind of called me out, so I guess it will. What we're trying to put together, and we received questions at the last board meeting that we said we'd get back to folks on. And as we sifted through the questions, they weren't, a vast majority weren't necessarily questions as they were, and for lack of a better descriptor, a statement of fear with a question mark at the end of it. We know there are a lot of concerns, and we're hoping to resolve some of those through the presentation tonight as we walk folks through the process. We know those fears don't go away. So what we want to do is make sure we provide the opportunity to dialogue, because it's tough to address a question out of context when it comes to the way they were phrased. So what I'm hoping to do is put together a panel that will include me, Mark Ballard, whoever else on the board can be available, Dave Koval from the Department of Health, maybe somebody from Mercy Health, and we just field questions. Whatever they are, throw them out there. We'll engage in dialogue back and forth the best we can, because the concerns are legitimate, but the way the questions were posed were difficult to respond to without sounding in a way that wasn't caring. It was just tough to engage that way. So yeah, so we're trying to put that together for whenever. I know Dave's got to be crazy for these times. Whatever Dr. Koval's doing.
Thank you.
All right, so then here's our decision-making process that we've gone through. And it's an if and then process that we've gone through. And so at the top, you look at the if, and we defined as a group our most vulnerable students, because one of our commitments is that we need to start with our most vulnerable students and staff and build out from there. So we said the students whose social and emotional needs aren't being met. Students have specific needs beyond demographics, with needs which are exacerbated by not being in school. And then even during the best of times, these are vulnerable students, and now they're even more at risk. So we started with our most vulnerable students and staff risk connected to the CDC criteria, and we have data from our families and staff, and we consider the state's county color designation and Lorain County specifically. Then the following models are feasible. And so based on all the listening that we've done, all the work our work groups have done to this point, where we are right now is that at an elementary level, in-person, hybrid, or full remote are all still feasible models. At the middle school, full remote at this point is the only feasible model that we can come up with. High school, full remote is the only feasible model that we can come up with. So let's go a little bit deeper. So in elementary level, our hope is that we can work out a few more specifics around logistics that we can bring all of our elementary students pre-K through 5 in person every day. That's our hope. We still have work to do on that. So hybrid is still a possibility, as is full remote. But our hope is that we can safely, as safe as possible, bring in our preschool through 5th grade students every day in person. When we think about the safety components of that, the data that we've received through the Center for Disease Control, the Ohio Department of Health, the County Health Department, and then the interpretation through the Department of Education, Mercy, and Cleveland Clinic, There is emerging clear research that shows that students under 10, children under 10, are the least likely to have severe symptoms and also the least likely to transmit the virus. In a recent study from South Korea, students under 10, they're 72% less likely than those over 10 to transmit the virus. There are a number of patterns in how children gather and congregate, and if safety protocols that we've been working to develop are in place, children under 10 can be reasonably safe, staff can be reasonably safe. We do not have those final details yet worked out to absolutely commit to that. We still need a few more days, probably the next week, for us to work that out all the way to know. So all three possibilities are still on the table. Some of the staff feedback that we received that got us to this point. A large percent of our comments indicated families, I'm sorry, I think I'm talking families here. Let me finish that thought, then we'll get to staff. Of our families indicated that they, at an elementary level, are struggling to balance the commitment of work and childcare, which we have to respect. 50% of our families in elementary said that they were uncomfortable. Many of our families, though, also said they want to know more about the plan, and for those that are unsure. On the staff side, we know that 50% identified that they either are at risk or living with someone or caring for someone who has an increased risk for severe illness. So we still need more details, and as Dr. Graham and Carol have both said, we need to know from our staff who needs accommodations, so we can have that missing piece. It's a big missing piece to this point that we need to learn more about as we look more about which option is the most feasible then. And our staff told us very clearly they need better professional learning around tools for remote learning. This is why it was very important to us then that we pushed back the start of school, one of the reasons, by 3 weeks to do that. So right now, elementary, in-person, hybrid, or full remote are all possibilities. We are, again, to repeat, we are hoping that we can offer an in-person 5-day-a-week model for our families to choose. Right? So we'll go to middle school and walk our way through. For middle school, well, we just don't believe that based on the feedback we've received, based on the research and the safety information from the organizations, that a full 5-day in-person or a hybrid model are feasible at this point. The logistics around transitions are really hard to figure out, quite honestly. And again, with the emerging research that's coalescing around about age 10 being that hinge point, it's really hard to limit contact then for our middle schools and then also for our high schools. Again, some of the parent feedback, there is definitely concern about students bringing COVID home. And again, over 10, students seem to be able to transmit at very similar rate as adults. Our middle school families, again, told us that they would like to be in school, but they're certainly supportive online as long as online is better than what they experienced in the spring. Let's go to high school. For very similar reasons as middle school, high school, the only feasible option that we can see right now is full remote. Again, transitions and limiting the spread and exposure through exposure, we just can't see how right now with what we know that we could do that safely. So hybrid and in-person are not options that we're considering for high school right now. We've been through, again, the staff feedback already. The parent feedback in high school. High school had the largest degree of uncomfortableness, if that's a word, around returning to school in person. There also is the strongest advocacy through the comments in the survey for online learning, as long as, again, it's a more robust model than what was offered in the spring. So for high school, we're not considering right now an in-person or a hybrid model. Full remote is what we're looking at for high school. Now we're also, and another one of our ands is tying this to the county, countywide color coding system. So if we go to the next one. As Dr. Graham mentioned before, and we've mentioned throughout, our model has to be flexible, and we need to be very nimble to be able to adjust based on current trends. So what we're proposing is that our model of delivery would also be connected to the county color coding designation. At a very simple level, if the county is colored red or purple, all learning would be remote. We would not have any in-person options. We would not have any hybrid options. All learning would be remote. At the orange level and the yellow level, right now, what we're saying is that the high school and middle levels, those would still both be remote. And our hope still is at the elementary level that in the next few days, in the next week, we can figure out all the details to be able to offer as safe as possible an in-person option. That said, if the county color changes from orange, which we currently are, to red, we would switch to full remote. If it were to switch to purple, we would switch to full remote. So we need to be nimble in how we design our service delivery going into the school year. Dr. Graham, do you want to add?
Ross, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What would be the time frame commitment to the plan? As far as, would it be 9 weeks, 18 weeks, what are you looking at?
Yeah, thanks for that question. One of the things that we're actually trying to avoid is a firm time commitment. So we know that a number of districts, my own children's district where we live, they ask for a semester commitment. And what we're going to try to avoid is asking our families to make that type of commitment. We want to be able to offer flexible options. So if remote learning is not working and we're able to offer them in person, we want you to be able to experience it in person. If you start out in person and something comes up and a family member falls ill for some reason and you need to go remote, we want you to be able to go remote and to be able to have that experience. What we don't want is for our families, we're going to try very hard to avoid, is to have our families make a commitment that they're locked into that is frankly not successful for them and their child, and they can't get out of that. So we're working very hard to be able to offer a real nimble, flexible model that can adjust.
And another question, at the high school especially, and this has come up with my colleagues, would we have access to the building to do the remote learning from our classrooms so we could create a more authentic learning experience for our students? I think that was an issue. Working from home just isn't a good option even for the teachers. So the hope is that we can come into the building and do those things in our classrooms.
And that's one of the things we don't have quite the answer. The goal is yes, but the reality is if we're going to teach students, again, what we've been saying fifth grade, but 10 years older or 10 years of age or younger, we may have to spread out throughout the district a little bit more depending on how many parents choose that option. So until we know, and Jeff Ox did a great job of breaking it down, that architect has a nice rendering of how best to organize desks to maximize the number of students you can put in the classroom while still maintaining that social distance. So we know that in our district, depending on the building, we can have between 9 and 11 students in the classroom. So some of that hinges on how many of our parents take advantage of the in-person model once we figure out how to do that as safe as possible.
Because that was another thing, like some teachers were wondering, could we have, 3 or 4 kids come into the classroom, make an appointment almost if they need extra help, because maybe, in a class they just aren't getting it virtually, could they come into their, say at 2 o'clock, you're coming in to meet with so-and-so?
And the short answer to that question is yes. And I think Ross was careful throughout, we've tried to be careful throughout this process to say based on what we know now, as of right now, and the goal is to do that. However, once we learn more, we get better at this, we can provide a safe environment for our students and our staff to, not want to say push the envelope, but to provide more in person, we'd like to be able to do that. But in terms of timelines, kind of like the last time we met, we were talking about what's the timeline for a plan. Timelines, especially when you don't know anything right now, and we don't know when we're going to know more, the timeline would be completely arbitrary. But what we're hoping is there's enough trust out there that just as we transition into the school year, we said, it's going to take another 3 weeks before we're ready to do this. So let's do the 3 weeks, pump the brakes, make sure we're taking our time to do it right. As we transition to something more, we have to be respectful of that as well. So again, we've had a whole lot of people looking at all this. I think we had a meeting today that is consistent with meetings we've had in the past that were, I think, 37 people zoomed in. We had teachers, we had support staff, we had board members, we had administrators, we had all kinds of people represented. And I would want to honor that process as we transition into something different than what we're doing here to make sure we're not going too fast, and we're also being respectful to the needs of people.
Steve, so this is Shanty. So my only concern would be, because I'm gonna caution on the side of safety at all times, right? So my only concern would be if students do schedule appointments to come in, and we have really, our profession is really good-hearted educators. We didn't plan for this, but we do plan for interacting with our kids and keeping them the best. However, with that good-hearted nature, we also have to be cautious, because if 4 kids come in, 8 kids come in, 12 kids come in, that mitigation of the spread starts to break down a little bit. And then we also have to worry about contamination and then deep cleaning again. So just make sure we're not stressing the cleaning department, and making sure that we have enough items that will disinfect the school. So all these things have to come into consideration. Because I know we have really good-hearted people, but we also want to protect those people who want to protect the adults as much as we want to protect the students. So with that said, my question would be, how many substitutes do we typically use in a year from
Typically in a year, I don't have that. Yeah, I don't have that number directly off of my head. Can you hear me? I'm not sure he can hear me anymore. Well, go ahead. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but from my recollection being in the district before, that we had approximately 80 to 90 subs through the North Coast Shared Service Alliance. My concern with substitutes for this year, as I'm sure as many other districts across the state of Ohio and other states, is that they will be having the same concerns, safety and health concerns that we do as a district. So we have already reached out to the North Coast Shared Service Alliance and Rachel Wixie to talk about, first of all, some of their trainings that they're providing their staff members, and they have increased their trainings to include COVID-19 training and an additional training regarding illnesses and safety. But in terms of numbers, I think that will be a concern for this year and something that the HR team and I think also the curriculum and instruction team will be continuing to look at as we go through this process.
I have a question.
And then
Go ahead.
will they continue to have the same number of substitutes available? Has that number of substitutes increased or decreased for them due to COVID? So are more people saying, I don't want to be a sub this year? I'm going to sit this one out for a while until things clear up because I don't want to go to a building or to a school? Or are they still maintaining their same number of substitutes available?
Sure, that is a really good question. So I'll need to find that out from Rachel Wixie. That's not part of what we asked so far, but it's a very good question that we need to know. So I appreciate that.
You got it.
I have a question also related to subs. So, for example, the high school, since we know we're going to be remote learning, and then I presume that teachers would be remotely delivering their lessons. What does that look like in the sub world? The sub then remotely engages, or will we have, will we use our own staff? I'm just trying to figure out how do we, not in a COVID sickness, but I've got the flu, or is there any, what are our thoughts around that? If that's not too early a question to ask.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
And actually, I appreciate the question because we get a whole lot of questions like that where we know we have to figure out the answer, just don't have the answer yet. But again, the goal is to add all the questions to the list as we work toward the curriculum plan.
Please add that one to the list.
The specifics of it, I don't know. I can see it happening very similar to how a sub would act in a typical setting. But it's depending on how it's delivered, as Rick mentioned a couple times, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously, it's a good approach to do.
And additionally, having that blended model approach, if I am down for, let's say it is a couple days, so it all depends on the continuum of the absence. If I'm down for a couple days, then if I front load, there's asynchronous approach, and students can do that. Think about if there's partnerships in the classroom, maybe there could be some assistance there, so I'm still need to tune in. I guess it would depend on the severity of the athlete, and then how we apply that blended approach at that point. But yeah, there's a lot of
And
things we
also,
have to go through with that. Please read it.
And also, we really want to do our best to have our teachers all on the same page in terms of, at least somewhere in the general area of what they're teaching. The Algebra 1 teachers are somewhere in the general area of teaching a certain standard, so that if an event that the Algebra 1 teacher's down, maybe the kids can jump in with another Algebra 1 teacher, because the beauty of that is everybody's at home and no one is together. So there are some ways to kind of look at that in terms of using our own staff and not having to go with subs, because it is, we are at home.
Because it's kind of a, not if it happens, but when it happens.
Right.
True, exactly.
And we have 58 pages, and that's an exact number of questions and answers, and that is not a question that we have. So thank you for posing that. We can figure that out.
But
Thanks.
again, we don't pretend to sit here and have all the answers, but I think that in a time like this, I think the focus needs to be on leadership and communication. What I mean by that is, leadership is all the folks at this table, all the folks who are zooming in on the screen over there, the 37 people that zoomed in on a meeting earlier. I think we have a solid set of people with expertise across the board and who care about the people we serve. So, and the communication part, it's all about engaging. It's about engaging our staff. It's about engaging our community. It's about listening, learning, and leading. So as we package those things together, we'll get the answers, and we'll be wrong sometimes. But again, I think the process that we follow is an honorable one. And when it's got, again, good people at the table, we'll turn out to be right more often than not.
So let's talk then through our next steps and where we are in our process and what's the immediate next step, and then in the next couple weeks. So tomorrow, actually, we're going to invite our first vetting team to take a look at this draft of a plan here. And we're going to ask them questions about safety, about our most vulnerable students, about, I just went blank, safety, vulnerable students, then also the quality of instruction that they believe that this plan will allow, and then open-ended, what do you like, what don't you like, what questions do you have? So we're going to have staff represented, we're going to have ask for families, we're going to ask for some administrators, so we can get some real specific feedback on positives and areas that we need to make adjustments with what we've done so far. So then by the end of next week, we anticipate being able to have a revised version of a plan that then we can carry right into focus group process. And so we want to be able to walk some of our stakeholders really through very, very specific, detailed experiences within our plan, and get more very specific feedback on adjustments that we need to make, so that we are as ready as we possibly can be here for the start of the school year. And again, we have had a lot of stakeholder involvement, feedback that lets us know, yep, you're on the right track. Nope, you're a little bit off track there. We need to think about this. The question about, subs in a remote environment, we need and we crave that kind of feedback, so we can make sure that we are as thorough and comprehensive as possible. So those are some of our immediate next steps. If we look then just a little bit farther out and where that falls in the process as a whole, if we go to the next slide, that'd be great. Yeah, thanks. So we grayed out a number of these triangles that we've accomplished so far. And so you can see that the first vetting of the plan that will start with our process tomorrow, and then the very beginning of next week. We'll make revisions. We'll have a second draft of the plan. We're anticipating that by the end of next week. That'll lead into the focus groups the very beginning of the following week. Based on that feedback, we'll turn that right around and have a final draft. I think Michael mentioned earlier, and somebody else, I don't remember, but we will, and with that 3-week period, look at a phased in opening of school. And then Dr. Sampson, back to your question much earlier in the meeting, we are going to need to check ourselves and measure and learn and make adjustments. As Dr. Graham just said, we're completely confident in the teams that we've developed. We have excellent people working on the development of our plan right now, from the support staff, the teachers that we have, the principals, We have excellent family members, excellent team, and we are going to make some mistakes. And so we need to make sure that we can find out where we're making mistakes quickly, where we're going well, and so we can make adjustments. So that'll be a part of our process in an ongoing way, is to see how well are we doing. And that means we're going to be reaching back out to families again through surveys. We're going to be surveying staff again, and making sure that we are constantly informed about where we are and against where we need to be going. Turn it back to you, Dr. Graham.
Yeah, obviously our process will communicate in all the ways that we have learned that you want us to, as well as expand to others. And for us, and I appreciate your patience, it's been about 2.5 hours. And the goal wasn't to draw it out, build suspense, and then have an unveiling. But I thought it was important for you to understand the why behind the process. As I said at the beginning, it comes down to, we need to know where we are, we need to know where we want to be, and we need to know how to get there. And I think we're there for most of it. And again, the why, we wanted to focus on our most vulnerable students. And one thing we know for sure is that no one's safe from COVID. The only thing we can do is take precautions to decrease the likelihood that that someone gets it or transmits it. And I also know that safety is defined differently in different households. When you get hungry enough, even with COVID, you go to the grocery store because you need food. We know that the children that we serve need the adult interaction, they need other student interaction, and it's much more important, statistically speaking, for our younger students, for our younger children. So I think we need to take the opportunity that we can to do as safely as we can and provide the services to our students. What we also don't know is that we have to figure out a way to meet the needs of other students. We talked about the fact kids come to school for food. We've got a plan for that. Mental health needs, trauma needs, all the other needs, kids come to school to get those needs met, which is historically where they've been met. We have to figure out how to do that remotely. If not, we have to figure out a way to bring them in, to your point, Dr. Sampson, in a way that's safe for everyone. So we develop protocols. But we can't just assume that the needs of our children go away because they're not coming to school. But we also have to make sure that we're protecting our adults in every step of the process. And again, the best we can.
I'll add quickly, I know we pushed back our start date of when we're coming back to school. And I always get back to the conversation of our extracurricular and our athletics and sports and band and those kind of things. If we're saying at the middle school and the high school that we're probably going remote or virtual, have we considered what we're going to do, knowing that some colleges are taking their fall sports and moving into spring? Some are canceling them altogether. Have we put any thought on what we're going to do with those?
I think the concepts we outlined today need to transpire, transcend to all the areas of student activities. And the conversations that I've had many with you individually about, is it the right thing to do when it did to bring children in for athletics? And again, talking to the health commissioner, the response is we're taking the necessary precautions. So again, as long as we can do that, and I know the Ohio High School Athletic Association pumped the brakes a little bit on, the goal was to start out slow and keep kids spread apart in small groups of children, and then as we get closer to the start of sports, to allow for more. And I know right now they're not allowing for more. The debate on that is, can we do it safely? And again, we can't keep anyone safe regardless of what we do. And for the extracurricular activities, whether it's band or football or basketball, our goal has always been to keep our kids, in our schools and off the streets. And it's a great opportunity because, again, there are risks either way. And based on the protocols we've been able to follow, I believe that we've been able to keep folks as safe as possible. But I think your question is, moving forward, does that still make sense? And that has not been chewed on yet. I guess those same groups will sit down and talk about.
In addition to that, because I saw the different influencers on the decision making, the county data and all of that. In our sports world, I think we're the only team that's not in Cuyahoga County. So at some stage, we have to look at Cuyahoga County's data. If all the teams that we compete with are in Cuyahoga County, then I think that has to become a factor with how we participate. We're not going to be comfortable going into the red Cuyahoga County, or having the red Cuyahoga County come into our facilities also. So again, I think those are, when we start looking at sports piece, we have to expand our scope a little bit. So.
And to add on to that, I got a call from Brian Corey, our athletic director, and he also oversees of other co-curricular activities. And his concern in having conversations, and this is not specific to Cuyahoga County necessarily, but he's having conversations in several different groups from athletic directors all over the state. And his concern is that they're not following what we're supposed to follow. So even if you're in a safe place, if you're not doing what we know to be the safest, take the most precautions, should we mix? And don't have an answer to that yet, but I would have concerns.
Is that it?
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate your patience for that.
Dr. Sampson?
Thank you. Dr. Graham, I'm highly impressed with the work that this team has done. Great updates. There's just one that we're getting into the evening, and I just want to make sure that we keep our eye on the ball. Number one, keeping people safe. And number two, which is a pressing issue, we started out the summer, or midsummer, talking about Lorain against racism, period, and having equity and access, not just policies, but also actions that drive the process. And I know we're in the process of looking at starting school back up, but I also want to make sure that we don't drop the ball on that. Myself and yourself, we woke up this morning in the skin that we're in, and these things will continue until we actually have policies and processes in place to address these things. So just want to make sure that we continue to stay strong on that while we're doing other items simultaneously.
And I appreciate that. We've had this conversation in terms of the value of what you discussed. And I hope that it was clear to everyone who saw that presentation that equity was our focus. We talk consistently about our most vulnerable, about those who have needs that have to be met. It's not about equality. It's about making sure that every child has equal access to opportunities, whether they're learning from their kitchen table or they have the opportunity to come in our classroom. So that said, we have, obviously, our job typically as leaders is to live 5 years in the future. But sometimes the world changes and we have to adjust on a dime and look at the immediate safety and needs of our community, and that's where we are with the COVID piece. That said, we still haven't changed our focus on the long term, so living 5 years in the future. And we have already discussed what happens once we get the ball rolling, once we get people settled and learning begins, how to improve curriculum, how to make sure that we provide equity across the district. And when Ross was here, Ross met the folks in Lorain about 3 years ago in his role as SST out of Cuyahoga County, and his role was to come in and do an equity audit. And we got a lot of great data. We have a lot of baseline data now. So when we initiate that process again here in a couple of months, we're already a little further ahead than we would have been. So do you want to speak to that at all, Ross?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. One of the big things, and this is just so important to us, is that we're looking to see how well are we mirroring our demographic. And so we'll get a team together that will be a diverse team in terms of role, in terms of race, in terms of a lot of other identifying characteristics that will we'll use the prior equity audit from a few years ago as a starting point, and we'll be really specific and intentional about what it is we want to check and we want to measure. So we'll have a baseline to go off of from 3 years ago, which will be an excellent starting point. And then we will peel back all the layers of the onion. And we're going to look to see how well do we mirror our demographic now as opposed to 3 years prior. So we'll look to see, are we overrepresenting through discipline? Are we underrepresenting through course enrollment? For example, we'll look at attendance patterns. One of the interesting things that we were actually discussing this morning that might be really interesting to look at is how many of our students, and then we'll break that down by different demographic categories, are participating in remote learning. So there's some emerging evidence that shows our students with disabilities are underrepresented remote learning. Students of color are underrepresented in remote learning. So we'll see if we can figure out some ways, and there probably are some ways that we as a team can figure out so that we're extremely intentional about looking to provide equitable opportunities for everyone. The other part about equity, and I don't think we mentioned this enough in the description of our plan, and why another reason why the pre-K-5 in-person option is so important for us, assuming we can do it as safely as possible, is that many of the suburban districts and students across the country are having an in-person option. And we know that reading development is one of the great equalizers for students of color, students experiencing poverty, and other marginalized groups. And it is extremely important to us that we do everything we can to prevent the achievement gap from getting larger, and we accelerate learning. So that is an extremely important measure of equity. And we have to make sure we do this as safely as possible without compromising the health of our students and our staff. So that's another one of the great challenges, and we hope again in the next few days, begin the next week, to have that figured out, because that is of the utmost importance to us.
You have any further comment, Dr. Sampson?
No, not at this point. Are you guys good on your end?
Yeah, we've just, I've got to announce our next board meeting will be on August 10th, and right here at 5 o'clock. And I'll add before I put a motion to dismiss that I've been on a lot of these meetings and on a lot of these calls, and seeing the effort that has been put into getting us to this point. It seems like a slow, methodical process, because it is a slow and methodical process, but I think it's been well worth it. And, you know, a lot of people don't know how we get to our why, and we could have made a statement weeks ago and just followed the path of everybody else, but we're not everybody else. And I appreciate that pathway and all the hard work that this great administration that you put together have done over the process. I've gotten to know a lot of them, gotten to work with a lot of them, and I'm just very impressed with how we're getting through this process. So to all the staff, you guys please continue to keep up the great work. Thank you for that.
Again, I agree with great people.
Yes, absolutely. Great people. Sure that on my end, I need a motion to adjourn. Do you guys have anything further from anybody? You guys are good?
Motion to adjourn.
Roll call?
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
And who was the second? Sorry.
Bill?
Mr. Girdle?
Yes.
Mr. Ballard?
Yes.
Mrs. Zaria?
Yes.
And Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
As far as the school board, we are adjourned. Randall is back in your hands.
Thank you. All right, so from our end on our agenda, it says we're going to executive session, but I think that we probably won't. So we'll go into executive session and then come out at the same time. So we'll just go through the process. So we already saw it.
Yes,
All right, so to enter executive session, consider appointment and appointment dismissal, discipline, promotion, and compensation of public employees, and discuss pending litigation of commission may not take action upon coming out of the executive session. So we're going to enter executive session. Can I get a motion?
Motion.
All right, that's Mr. Coughlin, second.
Second.
Thank you.
And can we get a roll call vote?
Mr. Coughlin,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Sampson,
Yes.
Dr. Solis. Yes. And Mrs. Zander.
Yes.
Alrighty.
All right, so exiting executive session, to exit. Have a motion?
Second.
Dr. Solis and Mr. Coughlin. Okay, we'll do another roll call. Mr. Coughlin,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien. Yes. Dr. Sampson,
Yes.
Dr. Solis,
Yes.
and Mrs. Zander.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can we get an adjournment motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah. Thank you, Patty. Good.
All right, we are adjourned. Appreciate everybody and keep up the great work of Team Lorain. And everybody stay safe, wash your hands, and mask up.
Everybody, thank you.
I'm very questioning.